Premature optimization and overengineering. I've been guilty of it, and maybe you have too. Let's talk about it.
Just take it easy, man.
You can't handle the truth. Forget it, Donnie. You're out of your element.
That's just my opinion. I could be wrong.
This has been a topic I've been really interested in for a long time now. I've been trying to get my thoughts straight about it before I talk about it in one of these rants. I remember early in my career, I had a lot of insecurity about what I was doing, and I always wanted to go that next step. I wanted to get that raise. I wanted to be a team leader or an architect or something like that. And because of that, I thought my code had to look better than it was. I thought what we were doing was more complex and more interesting than just the simple business logic we were actually writing. And so I found myself falling into sort of a pit of complexity. I'd draw these very complicated architectural diagrams. I'd create numerous abstraction layers for anything that could possibly go wrong. And some of that was valid back then, back when I was writing C++ primarily, because change was really expensive back then. The amount of time we had to worry about debugging because we didn't have something like a garbage collector, or we had memory leaks, or we had all sorts of problems in C++ that we really don't have in C# and even to some extent JavaScript and TypeScript. When I work with clients and I see those very same things, I get a sense that maybe the same thing is happening. Let's talk about premature optimization first, because I run into this a lot on the forums and people I talk to at conferences. Everyone's trying to eke out every little bit of performance out of their applications when, in many cases, they don't really need it. Trying to save cycles by making sure your loops inside of C# are the most efficient and the most delicate isn't really saving you much, especially when you're in a distributed environment. You have a website, you have APIs that are then calling data stores. The amount of time you're saving compared with those network round trips and the other much heavier pieces where you should be spending your time optimizing in some respect is just ludicrous. The speed of the servers running this are going to be fine when it's just simple C# code. What I find happens a lot with that is I want to make sure that no one in a code review can argue with me about this being the best or worst. I used to look for not using string.empty back when it mattered. These days it doesn't matter anymore. String concatenation and all these things that put pressure on the memory load. And all of that is important when you need it. Your application might not matter, right? You have 20 users and you're writing an application inside your enterprise. Are you worried about optimization, or are you worried about getting to the next task? And the other thing that I was certainly guilty of in my career was wanting to look good. And so I spent my time over-engineering things. One of the classic examples I see in a lot of situations are people are prepared to abstract out certain parts of their application in case there's a change. The classic one of this is writing an abstraction layer for your data access because it might be hosted on Oracle or SQL Server or MySQL or whatever you're using, right? Or maybe even a NoSQL data store, and you want to not have to touch all your code when that happens. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter. You're going to have to touch it anyway. The revolution in software becoming cheaper to write, and I don't mean that developers should get paid less, but that the machines are doing a lot of the type checking and the optimizations so that we don't have to on the ground level, means that we can expect that if we move from SQL Server to Oracle or from Oracle to Cosmos DB, that we're going to have some work ahead of us. And it's not worth the effort just in case. When I go back and look at some of the requirements documents and some of the user stories I built, the code that came out of that invariably was more complex than I would like it today. I feel like I've learned some of those lessons, that simplicity is often the right thing. Complexity for its own sake isn't necessary. I don't know who said this, and I'm certainly going to get the quote wrong, but I now sort of live on the edge of this idea that it has to be as simple as possible and as complex as necessary. The idea of complexity meaning when we need to Let's say you're building a microservice architecture. That adds complexity that might be necessary because of your use case. But if you're not Netflix or you're not Facebook, maybe a lot of that complexity is just so that we can have a better resume or that we can get that next job offer or promotion. It doesn't really work that way because you get caught up in looking at the minutia and the complexity instead of being able to see the gestalt view of the projects you're working on. So when faced with a decision about should I make this more complex or less complex, make it less. Our jobs are already complex. With technology moving at such a great rate, we don't need to add additional complexity to make ourselves look good. That's all I have to say on the subject. If you like these rants and my comments, feel free to subscribe, like the video. It all helps. And thanks again for joining me for my rants. See you next time.